Good afternoon, everybody. Maybe good morning if you're on the west coast of this country. Welcome in to a Week 10 edition, double digits, over the halfway point of the NFL season. Thursday night showdown slate between two fantastic, so exciting NFC South teams in the Carolina Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons. I'm Gary Hartman, joined as always by my good friend, my co-host, Cody Main. How are you doing?
You know, I call this matchup a repugnant matchup between NFC South rivals in the article. And that was before I had written anything up. That was before I even had a chance to look over the slate. And I actually kind of like this slate. And as Adam would say, if he were on the show, he would tell us the money's going to be won regardless. There's $500K up top on DraftKings. So, you know, I'm actually pretty excited about this repugnant matchup.
Me too. Election season over here at ETR. Fun merch coming soon, as you may have seen Wiggins rocking the new shirts, the new apparel soon. Love this stuff. Check it out when it goes live. I think maybe around Thanksgiving is the word I'm hearing. So fun stuff going there. Hope you all did exercise your right to vote this week. And let's go on right there. Let's talk macro view here. Not many 5-1s going either way here. And I actually think this is an interesting place to be because, yes, it's a low scoring game, 43-point total, but neither of these teams that much better than the other. And you could see, what I'm saying is the variance of the way this game can go is very high, where I think 5% on a 5-1 is pretty low for the amount of exposure that I'd want to get if I were MME.
Yeah, I totally agree on both sides. And 1 point for the Carolina side on the 1-5 side, the way that this game could go, you could see Carolina lose this game. But because of the way Atlanta wants to play extremely run heavy, they want to put the ball on the ground, not going to be a lot of PPR volume, especially if they're playing from ahead. You could see Carolina lose in a 5-1 or 1-5, in this case, 1 Atlanta, 5 Panthers, still end up being optimal just because of the play volume that you're going to get from the Carolina side. And the fact that when they are trailing, they are a little bit more willing to drop back. So I think, like, from a macro perspective, I would want exposure to both sides because I think you could see another situation where, it's PJ Walker under center. It could potentially be Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold. Like, this Panthers offense has at times, as we saw last week, just look absolutely abysmal. I think they get it going, but there are certain outcomes, as you mentioned, the variance, the volatility of this game where Atlanta just puts it on them. And that seems crazy to say given the state of Atlanta's offense and defensive situations. But, they are favored on the road, and I think you could see outcomes on both ends of the spectrum. So, like Gary, like me, if you guys are building, portfolio of lineups tonight, I think you would kind of want exposure on this entire spectrum from 1-5 all the way up to 5-1.
Yep, agreed there. Anything else macro wise? I know One Eye Jack is asking if he thinks 3-3 might be under owned because of how tight this matchup might be. I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I think it possibly could be. The one thing, there is not depth on either side where you're going to see the field get really condensed on either 5-1, 4-2. It's so spread out, I think, and there are equally strong, I use that term loosely, strong options on either side. So I think 3-3 is going to end up being kind of consensus tonight, the way that the build's set up.
Yeah, I agree with you there. All right, let's dive in then to quarterback. And as we mentioned, we're making fun of this matchup a little bit, and that is because we get Marcus Mariota versus PJ Walker. We did see Baker Mayfield come into that game in the second half in week 9, but Carolina was quick to come out and say that PJ Walker would start this week. We did see 2 pretty, respectable weeks prior to this past week for the Panthers out of PJ Walker. So we know we could put up some points. Obviously, former XFL superstar Mariota, the pass rate on Atlanta continues to be a major concern for fantasy upside. Take me through what you're thinking with these two guys tonight.
Yeah, I think the biggest story of the slate comes down to PJ Walker and will he start and finish this game? I talked about it in the article. I'm kind of willing to bet on PJ Walker starting and finishing this game. And I think a large part of that is because of the defensive matchup that they'll be facing. The Falcons will be without AJ Terrell. They'll be without Casey Hayward. And I think that's going to make their already porous pass defense even worse. This is a team that has struggled against the pass, and they're a team that is trending towards a pass funnel in terms of how teams are play calling against them. So I know Carolina wants to kind of mask their quarterback flaws. They want to be run heavy, but if they happen to fall behind early, or even if this is kind of a back and forth affair, I do think we'll see Carolina lean a little bit into that higher pass rate against this Falcons secondary. They faced the league's 3rd highest pass rate over expectation and the 5th highest overall pass rate through week 9. They're allowing the most pass yards per game, the 5th highest pass EPA per play, the 5th highest explosive pass rate. So I think PJ Walker starts. I think he comes out relatively strong, and in doing so is going to allow him to finish this game. So I know there will be some concerns about that. But that's kind of my starting point with this slate. I think as bad as it's looked, I kind of want to bet on PJ Walker starting and finishing, and that's going to play into how I'm looking at things from a tournament perspective tonight. So in on PJ Walker, I think you can get away from it in cash. I know we generally like the 2 quarterback builds in cash, but I think you can get away from it there, just given the price tag and some of the options that we'll get to at the skill positions that have a similar base projection and I think similar floor slash ceiling combo. So PJ Walker, probably okay to stay away from in cash, but I do think that 52.4% will come down as we get closer to lock, as there are some concerns about Baker and Sam Darnold possibly playing. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Carolina Panthers offense and where I'm at with PJ Walker. Mariota, I think just with the way that this game sets up and the limited options that we have, is certainly a cash game lock, going to be one of the most popular plays on the slate. Do you have any tournament leans on a 69.5% owned Marcus Mariota?
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, I agree with you on Walker. And I do think it's fair to say that Mariota's floor is much higher, but I actually think our ceiling projections should be actually a little bit closer together than we see there. I think Mariota's proven this whole year to be a strong floor, questionable ceiling player, the way this Falcons offense operates. And we've seen PJ Walker now, depending on how a game environment can get, show, for what he is, a little bit of a ceiling. So I think I agree with you. I want to be in on PJ Walker in tournaments. I think I'd want to be above the field. For tournaments of Mariota, I don't mind coming in under the field at 70%. Now, I think I'd probably want to be more around the field, and maybe even over in flex, but a captain, I'm probably looking at being under 15% for Marcus Mariota tournaments, just because, again, I appreciate the floor, and it's kind of how I feel about him on main slates. Like, he always projects pretty well for us. He makes things work. It is low 6, high 5s numbers, or mid 5K numbers, and we always talk about possibly using him in cash. But for me, he's never even on my radar in tournaments because I don't think the ceiling is there. So even though it's a 1-game slate, I'm going to kind of operate with the same mindset here. This game is in Carolina. The way that they play, very run heavy. I don't think he's got the Justin Fields type of run heavy performances in him to get to 150 plus rushing yards. So that's what you'd really need for me to feel comfortable about him. Me going 20% captain on Mariota. So
yeah, and even if you look at his box scores, like his baseline in terms of DraftKings projection is relatively strong. But even if you look at the box scores, he's had these games where it's been 4.9 DraftKings points, 7.8 DraftKings points, 12.1 DraftKings points. You can see it. How it goes poorly. And, if you were to be one of those guys that I think would get squeezed, like we've seen happen with Dalton, like we've seen happen with Davis Mills, these poor quarterbacks or subpar quarterbacks that end up not getting owned at all in Showdown, if I thought that was in his range of outcomes, then I would want to be in on it because there's a little bit more variance in his game, I think. But at 69, he's probably going to be the highest owned player on the slate, or one of the highest owned players on the slate. I think you could make a case to come in underweight in tournaments, while certainly knowing that there is some semblance of safety there because of the rushing ability that he possesses. Yep. That you can comfortably roster it in cash and find ways to avoid it in tournaments.
Yeah, agreed. He would definitely be in my cash lineups, for sure. All right, let's go over to running back here. Kind of an interesting. Let's start on the Atlanta side because there's a lot more to talk about there, in my opinion. Cordarrelle Patterson comes back last week, does get in the end zone twice, could have had a third touchdown, but no, this is not the same Atlanta backfield that it was pre-injury, because Tyler Algier has come onto the scene as, respectable player. Caleb Huntley clearly has a role in this offense. Avery Williams is hanging around. So I don't think it's as surefire of a spot for Cordarrelle Patterson as we maybe would previously have thought on this slate. But you could also maybe see that reflecting ownership, right? If this was week 3, I think Cordarrelle Patterson's ownership would be 60, 70%. We're seeing it at 51.6 total ownership there, which I think is actually an okay place to be. Curious if you have thoughts on Patterson or maybe any of these down running backs here.
Yeah, I think Patterson's a really big decision point. I mean, everyone's a big decision point, but 11.8 for Cordarrelle Patterson. He's priced around Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, these like tier 1 elite quarterbacks that we see on Showdown that are generally in this 11.8, 12, 12.2 range. And we've got CPAT up there as kind of the lead back in a 3-man committee. Now, I do think that his role is likely to grow from last week. His first week off IR, he played on 39% of snaps, had 37% of the team's rushing attempts, 44% of the red zone attempts. And, you noted the two touchdowns, 100% of the attempts inside the 5-yard line. I think that's going to be the thing that's most consistent for him going forward. And His base role will continue to grow. He's going to get more work between the 20s. But anytime there's a high leverage situation, I think they're going to sub out, if they can, Tyler Algier. And I think they want CPAT in there for those situations. So, 11.8 is really expensive, but I don't think salary is all that difficult to come by on this slate. So it really comes down to what do you think you're going to get from a raw score perspective. And as we'll see with some of these other skill position players on the Panthers side and some of the pass catchers on the Falcons side, like the base projection is relatively similar for all of these guys. But because he's 4K, 3K more expensive than them, I do think he will come in a little bit lower owned. 50% I think is pretty nice. If I get any sense that it comes down lower, I certainly want to take an overweight stance, as I just think CPAT has one of the highest true ceilings on this slate. And maybe he ends up getting closer to 50% of the work as, the Caleb Huntleys and Avery Williamses of the world get a little bit more squeezed out of the backfield.
Yeah, I think that's all a good point. I'm curious what you think as someone that's kind of doing all the work on the back end in these projections. If you want to take an overweight CPAT projection, whether you're running through ceiling or medium projections, do you think you have to boost him up given that price?
You will. You will, because it's going to want to, especially with me, like when I'm running the opto, running with a little bit of volatility, as we'll see, and we can sort by projection here at the end. There's so many guys between like this 10 and 12 point projection that the optimizers are going to want to give you more of the guys in the 7, 8, 9K range, as opposed to somebody like CPAT way up at 11.8, where you kind of have to make a few sacrifices to get up there. But I think the sacrifices that you're making are you can get relatively strong lineups in comparison to those guys that you're rostering at 7 and 8K. So I will be providing a manual boost to CPAT's projection when I'm running my optimizer tonight.
Yeah, and just a tip that Drew and I always talk about on the NBA shows, it's way more effective to be boosting projections and trying to get the optimizer to do what you want that way, rather than doing minimum or maximum exposures. That's where your combinations get all screwed up. The optimizer is just going to run the same thing multiple times until it hits your cap or reaches your cap. It's not, you want to try to get it through your projection, and you could boost them with with thumbs up, thumbs down type work. But just something to consider for somebody like CPAT tonight, where you will have to do some manual tweaking and in the numbers that our projections might not necessarily show. Algier, any thoughts there before we kind of go over to Carolina?
Yeah, it was encouraging for him to see how much of the work he maintained with CPAT coming back. I don't think that he's going to get squeezed out by any stretch of the imagination. He still handled 44% of the long down and distance snaps, 100% of the 2-minute snaps. I think he comes in for some of the pass down work alongside CPAT as well, and he probably sits in that 30 to 35% of the backfield touches range. And at 6,200, it's going to be tough for him to really beat that price tag without falling into the end zone. The way that I would be handling it is not setting a max one rule between him and CPAT, but I would be docking his projection in lineups where I do have CPAT, just because I think Cordarrelle's true ceiling comes when he gets a larger share of the backfield work.
Yep, agreed. All right. Carolina running backs, it's really been the D'Onta Foreman show. Obviously, he couldn't get it done last week. His game script got away from them very fast. And, they did give him a couple targets, but he's a between the tackles running back, more of a bruiser. I do think game script should be more friendly to him in this 43-point game total. I think they can try to stick to the run here a lot more, but they do get Chuba Hubbard back. And you can see there, we're kind of projecting for similar median and ceiling projections there, which actually surprises me. It's the first time I'm really taking a deep look at it. Take me through that Carolina backfield and everything there. So.
Yeah, and I think from a projection standpoint, the reason why we have Chuba looking as good, equally as good as D'Onta Foreman, is because of the pass down work. I think our projections are assuming that Chuba comes back from the 2-week absence and kind of immediately assumes that pass catching role again. You mentioned D'Onta Foreman. He was a 236-pound back coming out of college. I mean, he is a big bruiser between the tackles runner, and I think they'll use him in that manner as long as this game script stays close. But on PPR friendly sites like DraftKings, Chuba Hubbard's going to project equally as strong, and he's 2K cheaper. So if you're looking for, a final cash game piece, or if that salary just happens to work, I think Chuba's skill set is good enough on DraftKings that you can go there. However, you kind of alluded to the ceiling projections with Foreman. Foreman has 100-yard plus 2 touchdown upside well within his range of outcomes, particularly if this game stays close. We just saw it in weeks 7 through 9, even as he lost a bunch of work in that where they just got blown out. He still handled 66.7% of the team's rushing attempts, handled 2 attempts inside the 5-yard line, 77% of the attempts inside the red zone. So he's going to get the work. And on the ground, you're just hoping for him to be efficient. And I still think he's going to have to fall in the end zone, but I would not rule out a ceiling performance, even if he isn't involved as a pass catcher.
Yeah, I much prefer Foreman here. I just think when you think game script and I think they'll be able to stick to the run. And yeah, I mean, I get the Hubbard thing as far as pass catching role, but I don't know how much I care about pass catching backs in this type of game. So I like Foreman a lot here. I will be overweight at the 7.9% for sure at captain as well. But I get why our projections are reading this way. I would be boosting Foreman in my runs. And I would be negatively correlating them as well. I mean, you never know. Like they could be in the red zone, but on the 10 and it's 2nd and 10 or whatever. And, they still have Hubbard in there and they give an inside handoff that he takes the house. Like there's weird stuff like that. So I'd be negatively boosting.
And I'll take that question because I saw a question in chat about playing CPAT and Algier together. And I think I kind of answered that one with I would do a negative boost in the optimizer. If you're hand building, I probably wouldn't get there. But if I'm running 150 lineups, even in a 20 max, I would probably be okay with CPAT and Algier or a little bit of it. I would do the same thing here with Foreman and Hubbard. Could I see them being in an optimal lineup together? Absolutely. Do I think it's less likely if one of them is in there that the other one is in there? Yes. So I would be providing a negative or a dock, as we call it in the solver. I would be providing a dock on Hubbard's projection in lineups that have Deonta Foreman and vice versa.
Yeah, and this question real quick to stick to the solver. Check it out. I built on the solver for NBA last night. It was really great experience. But anyway, I would say this is totally dependent on how much CPAT you want, right? If you're trying to get around to the field, over the field, whatever, start small and increase from there. If you want to just start with boosts and thumbs up, we can go up to 5 thumbs up on the solver. You could do that if you want to, and see if that gives you a lot more. If you want to then be, 1 point, 2 point, 3, 4 points to the projection, keep running to get to the percentage that you want to have. It's all about what you're feeling tonight. So there's no right answer to this question as far as how much to boost up CPAT. Okay, receivers here. Let's talk. We're on the Carolina side already. Actually, let's take a little bit more of a macro view here as far as projection on the receivers front. Kind of seeing it pretty even there. Carolina, Atlanta, Carolina, Atlanta, Carolina, Atlanta. So it's not like one of these position groups is absolutely much of a more of a must play than the other. But DJ Moore definitely stands out as the best projection by almost 5 full points on Drake London, or 4.5 points on Drake London. Definitely been a more impactful fantasy receiver under PJ Walker, the kind of guy that we expected to get during draft season. Thoughts on DJ Moore here? I know Atlanta are they still missing those top 2 corners, AJ Terrell and the other guy? Yeah. All right, so.
Yeah. I mean, I got to take over here because this is just a slam dunk spot for DJ Moore. And I know people in the chat were pointing out, and rightfully so, there may be some weather concerns. We'll keep an eye on that up to lock. I will say one thing with the weather stuff is I would not be double counting it. The guys are already accounting for it in projections. The weather feeds directly into our projections. So we're docking where we think we need to with weather-related concerns. If you think it's just an absolute slop fest and it's even worse than the forecasts are projecting for, then sure, make your manual adjustments and your hand builds based off of that. But I think this is an absolute smash spot for DJ Moore. You have AJ Terrell out. You have Casey Hayward out. And this Atlanta defense was already allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. They ranked top 5 in points allowed to perimeter and slot, according to ESPN. In this role for DJ Moore, with PJ Walker under center, with Christian McCaffrey and Robbie Anderson traded, this role has been sick, man. I mean, 32.5% target share, 53.3% air yard share, 2nd on the team in end zone targets. It's really hard to poke holes in DJ Moore's outlook, and he's only 9,200. And that's where I think you can make the case. People were asking who would I play instead of PJ Walker in cash. PJ Walker's 9,600. It's DJ Moore for me. I think DJ Moore should be, if not the highest, one of the highest owned players on the slate. And the fact that he's cheaper than CPAT, cheaper than Mariota, cheaper than PJ Walker, I think is a mistake. And I think DJ Moore is just an absolute smash.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there. I think it's a great play. Let's talk about wide receiver as a whole. I think I'd stick into this. Actually, yeah. Let's talk Drake London here. As we go down with projection and salary on the receiver front. I guess Terrace Marshall is actually more expensive than Drake London, which tells you everything you know. But let's have the London conversation first. He's still going to project better because of the target share in that offense. He's getting these kind of empty red zone targets, but they're there. It's just so hard to be encouraged by this Falcons pass game, but we know the talent on London and Pitts, and we'll talk about Pitts in a second. 16%, 16-point ceiling, but 42% total ownership. It's a little bit much for what we've seen in the box score of late. That said, I think on a 1-game slate, I'm willing to keep investing into it. Curious if you have London thoughts.
Yeah, I think London gets interesting if the 7.6% captain ownership holds, because I think there are the true outlier upside games well within his range of outcomes. The consistent double-digit performances certainly have not been there, and I don't think they'll be there under this iteration of the Falcons offense. I will say, from like a more macro perspective on the Falcons passing attack as a whole, I mean, you have to have legitimate concerns about Arthur Smith willing to drop back with Mariota under center. They're dropping back at just a 43% clip in neutral situations. They have the league's third lowest pass rate over expectation. And this Panthers defense is kind of allowing teams to run on them, both from a play calling perspective and from just a personnel perspective, in not being able to stop it. So I think just from the opening kickoff, Arthur Smith is going to come out and establish it. And especially if there's any sort of weather concerns, he's certainly going to lean heavily into that. I really have a tough time seeing it with the Falcons pass catchers. I think you can get there on Drake London at 7.6% ownership at captain if you want to play for that type of outlier ceiling. But man, it's been really bleak for all of these guys.
For what it's worth, the game total is down to 41.5. So I think both weather and bets being on the under, and I know there have been a lot of sharps on the under early in the week at 43, like sharp bettors. It's something to consider here. I wouldn't mind playing defense heavy, running back heavy slate and playing into that narrative. That said, if you get a little different on some of these receivers that aren't going to be very owned, and we'll talk about some of them here in a second, it's something to consider. All right, Terrace Marshall on the other side of the DJ Moore of it all. He's very clearly established himself as the number 2 wide receiver in Carolina. Was a top prospect coming out of LSU, was somebody we were excited about a little bit coming into his rookie year last year. A little bit of a late bloomer because receivers usually do come right onto the scene, but definitely have been impressed over the last couple of weeks. Somebody that I think is there to stay as their wide receiver too. Again, I'm worried about volume here. I'm worried about environment. And I think if I'm playing a Carolina receiver, I just want to play DJ Moore. But the price of Terrace is going to make him a little bit of a contrarian play, especially at that captain spot at 3%.
Oh, baby. Yeah. That price is definitely going to make him a contrarian play. You have him more expensive than the running backs that we just talked about, who I think people are more excited about. You have him only $800 cheaper than DJ Moore, which again, I think is certainly a mistake. He's more expensive than Drake London. He's more expensive than Kyle Pitts. The 25.7 might honestly be high. I don't think there are people out there beating the drum at this point for Terrace Marshall, and projections certainly don't agree with it. He's got a 6-point worse base projection than his own teammate. He's got a worse projection than one of the league's lowest volume passing offenses in Drake London and Kyle Pitts. So I think that ownership's really going to get squeezed out. I think he could come in sub 20%. And the underlying stuff hasn't been all that bad for Terrace Marshall, if we can expect some baseline competency from this Panthers passing attack. Ever since the trades, ever since CMC was dealt, ever since Robbie Anderson was dealt, he's been out there for 95.7% of the dropbacks, running around on 95.7% of the dropbacks. Has a 28.6 air yard share, 21.7 target share, team high 5 end zone targets. Again, this is all a very small sample, but if you're gonna pay me off with a massive ownership discount, and you tell me that Terrace Marshall might come in under 20% total ownership, comes in around 3-4% captain ownership, there are certainly games within his range of outcomes where he not only beats DJ Moore, but ends up being the highest scoring player on this slate. And this is probably an easy one to see coming from anyone that's watched this show. But I'm in on betting on these player archetypes like Terrace Marshall, who I think is going to end up being a pretty decent player if you're going to give me that level of ownership discount. So we're not ready for the flag plant portion of this show, but I don't think Terrace Marshall should be under 20% owned tonight. And I certainly want to get above that amount.
Yeah. I think we need to have a little bit of a weather conversation again here, because I'm seeing people in the chat really getting worked up about the weather. I'm not seeing it on this radar stuff I'm looking at. And, you go to NFLweather.com. That's one place. I'm looking at Apple Weather, and I'll bring into some of the fantasy people that report on this stuff after the show. But I'm seeing like light rain, 10 to 20 mile per hour winds. If that is changing to 20, 30 mile per hours with what Jonathan in the chat is saying, monsoon type weather, of course that impacts things. Keep your eye on the weather. As of right now, I'm not seeing these crazy, insane weather that would impact it to this extent. But it is a factor, because if it's that bad, especially with these two bad teams, like, yes, they're going to keep the ball on the ground. They're not going to get crazy with it. So
yeah. For what it's worth, I saw the same stuff that you're referring to: 10
Yeah.
to 15 mile per hour winds, light rain, and you know, you guys really need to listen to that podcast with Chris Allen. He's better than anybody when it comes to fantasy, how weather impacts fantasy performances. And I know that our projection team will talk to Chris as well. But 10 to 15 mile an hour winds, if that's what holds, is not going to be impactful for fantasy performances.
I think even if it gets up to 20 to 30, if the rain isn't out, it's insane. I think we could still throw the ball a little bit here. You know, it's when you get up to 25 to 45 type of crazy stuff with the really bad rain. It's going to be raining. It's not going to look pretty out there, but I don't think we should. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Keep your eye on the radar. All right. So anyway, I'm not interested in other Carolina receivers. You can throw Shi Smith in as a punt. I guess he's the guy that's been playing more in 3 receiver sets. They brought in Laviska Shenault. I don't see it much from him either. These guys are guys that can make the team, make your pool. I guess Shenault would be a little bit more interesting to me over Smith in this matchup because there could be some design runs there. So I guess that's something to consider. But those guys aren't attractive plays with PJ Walker at quarterback.
Yeah, I'll throw this out there because I wrote it in the article as well. I think you can take a large field, and this is an extremely large field if you're building a portfolio of lineups. I think you can include Damiere Byrd.
Yeah,
4.28 speedster. He's seen 55.5% of his targets come at least 20 yards downfield. In these low volume passing attacks like Atlanta's, Damiere Byrd is one of those guys that could catch one and end up being, amongst the top scorers at 8% ownership. I think that's okay. But like you said, once you get past London in terms of all of these pass catchers on both sides, it gets really ugly.
Yeah, I agree with you. So yeah, Zacchaeus, Byrd, Smith, and Shenault make my pool. Are there punt guys here? I mean, Brian Edwards is 200.
No, that's the crazy thing. Not really. There's very few guys I think that are like sub 2K even that are really in play.
Yeah.
And I would say that group of like Zacchaeus down to like Shenault and those, you're really only using them as ways to get different. There's really no bull case to be made for these guys.
Agreed.
You're just playing them because of ownership.
Okay, let's talk tight end. Kyle Pitts, 40% owned. That seems crazy to me. The guy has had one good game, basically. What are you doing with Kyle Pitts?
Yeah, and I think part of that comes down to we just don't have these options, right? It's you have to play somebody, and Kyle Pitts is certainly going to be one of those guys that the field is interested in. And I think part of the reason why is because he's $1,200 cheaper than his teammate Drake London. So maybe you see the ownership on Drake get squeezed a little bit because he's a little bit more expensive than Kyle Pitts, but he's always going to have a decent base projection because you have to project the targets somewhere in this offense. And it's really him and Drake London. That's it. And it just hasn't been there yet. I think the one thing you can say about Kyle Pitts, and it's narrative based, but at least Marcus Mariota came out this week and acknowledged that he needs to get him more opportunities. Maybe there's some squeaky wheel stuff there where they do some design stuff to get Kyle Pitts a couple more targets than they have in the past. But I'm with you, man. It hasn't been there. And if it's going to come with ownership, then I think there's other ways to go. But the reason it's coming with ownership is just because there aren't that many other ways to go.
I'll just say this personally, even in Falcons 5-1 onslaughts, I would be max 2 Pitts, London, and Patterson. I don't know if you disagree with me. That's where I'd be at.
I think so. Yeah.
I don't think there's enough firepower in that offense to support all three in a 41 game total.
Yeah, you're right. The way that it would work out is if they're the 3 guys that end up scoring touchdowns, right?
Yeah, and maybe the only 3 touchdowns of this game or something like that. Yeah, 21-0 game. Yeah. I mean, you're right.
And that's such a thin outcome. But you're also you soak up so much of your salary in doing that I think a max 2 rule is probably right there.
Yep. But I'm also aggressive with those kind of rules. So
yeah,
I want to be under a little bit here at captain at 8%. And I get it can come back to crush me. I get it. But it's a lot. It's a lot in there. I'd rather London, I think. All right. Carolina tight ends. It's really been Tremble and Ian Thomas kind of splitting that work. I think both guys are fine punts. They're not like the $200 punts though. So they're just kind of there.
Yep. I mean, these are guys that have to go out and actually do something in order to find their way into winning lineups. I think I like Tremble a little bit. And you talked about Shi Smith and you talked about Laviska Shenault. I think I prefer, if you need to find that amount of salary, you got 3,200 left or 3,600 left. I think I prefer Tommy Tremble. Over the last 3 weeks, he's run around on 59.6% of dropbacks, has a 10.8% target share, and he's actually getting targeted further down the field. I think he's a guy they kind of like to use in the red zone. So the base projection is always going to be bad on those type of guys, but he could fall into the end zone. And again, that might just be what you need tonight.
Yep. All right. Everybody's favorite showdown segment, defense and kickers. I'm going to break these out one by one tonight because I think they're important on both fronts, particularly defense, though, especially if the weather's bad. Kickers will be a little bit tougher to trust. Defenses, though, We're seeing what 40-ish% total ownership on these two. That seems low to me.
I was really surprised when I ran ownership, and you know, if you're a subscriber, you'll have ownership updated all the way up to lock. So this may change as we get more information, as kind of the market adjusts to what we're seeing at this point. But I was really surprised to see on both. And I know the Falcons are a little bit expensive in terms of a DST salary, but they're going to be playing against a quarterback that has legitimate in-game benching risk. I think an interception is very likely. I think sacks are very likely. And it's an environment where you're not going to need a huge outlier type score. They might not even need to get the 15, 16, 17 points that we've seen from DSTs on winning slates in the past in order to crack their way into a winning lineup. So 24.1% ownership on the Falcons, I think, is really nice. And then similarly, the one problem with the Panthers DST is you're not going to see a ton of dropbacks from Marcus Mariota. And that's a problem. We want dropbacks when we're rostering a fantasy defense. We want those opportunities for pick sixes, strip sacks. We need that in order to get those points. But again, 3,800, 16% ownership in this game environment in particular, I think is relatively strong.
Yep, we agree there. I like both defenses at this ownership quite a bit. Still no captain though, because you know the field's going to play it.
Yeah, right? No captain for me. I think captain's going to be a little bit higher.
I think captain will be higher.
It allows you to. There's no skill position players in this range that the field is excited about. So that might be a nod to the total ownership coming up, but certainly it'll bring the captain ownership up, because if you play one of them at captain, you can kind of just fit in the rest of the studs in the flex. And I think that'll be a little bit more popular than it should be.
Yep. Kickers, you know, we've beaten the weather thing to death now. I'm not talking about that anymore. So just keep it in mind. If it is worse than we're anticipating, this could be rough plays. But for now, only 10% wins. I think both guys are fine. I think Younghoe Koo's been a guy that's had a lot of fantasy success. The Falcons are one of those classic teams that can get stopped, at the 20, 30 yard line quite a bit. So, but move the ball. So I think I prefer Koo in a vacuum here, but both guys coming through with similar ownership.
Yeah, it's a low total slate. And, I talk about how we can attack kickers on high total slates and low total slates alike. And I have to capitulate a little bit because Gary and I co-manage a FFPC main event team with good friend Ryan Reynolds. And my thesis with kickers has always kind of been, I just want the teams that are going to give me the most shots on goal, the teams that I think are going to score the most. And I'll just take my chances on them, getting stopped every once in a while. So I like kickers on the Chiefs, the Eagles, these offenses that I think are high powered. The problem with those offenses is they just score touchdowns all the goddamn time. So what ends up happening is you're just getting extra points. And Gary mentioned an important thing. I think both of these offenses will have, relative success moving the ball between the 20s, but can they find the end zone? And if they can't, these kickers, Eddie Pinheiro and Younghoe Koo, I think, could have relatively big nights. I think they're both cash game locks. As crazy as that is to say, I think you need both kickers tonight, or want both kickers tonight, given the skill position players that are priced around them. And I will certainly have tournament exposure to them as well, because I think, in this price range, they're much more likely to beat a good portion of the skill players that they're priced around. If you just look at the slate as a whole from a salary perspective, I mean, you need them to beat Tommy Tremble and Shi Smith, and you go all the way up to like Chuba Hubbard at 5,800 before you see somebody that really has a comparative base projection.
Yeah, that's really interesting there. And yeah, I mean, the kicker thing it's almost a joke at this point. Like, I don't think there's a wrong answer. And I know this is why you're all here for season-long kickers fantasy takes. But I think that you could obviously say somebody with the highest implied team total makes sense as your kicker. My thought always is I look for two things when I'm looking for kicker. One, I look for a dome because I don't want weather to impact me. And two, I look for good but not great offenses. I think offenses that settle for field goals a lot. And I'm sure we could do some research on this, as far as historical fantasy kicker performances. But that's what I look for. Regardless, Koo is one of those guys that I think fits that narrative for me. Okay. Oh, so I'm curious. You say both kickers in cash. All right. So it's both kickers and Mariota, and then is Patterson on your cash team?
I haven't decided on Patterson because I think I know I want DJ Moore, and I just don't know if the salary is going to work out.
Right. So you go both kickers. Mariota, DJ Moore. Are you going to any of the defenses in that?
I don't think I'll have defenses in cash. I still think there's too much volatility, even though I think they project well, and I think they're strong options. I think it's going to end up being what?
Yeah, I think you can the cash. Usually, I don't think cash is interesting at all. I think that's an interesting cash week because you could really make an argument for defenses, kickers, both quarterbacks, Patterson, Foreman, Moore, and I think some combination of that is what you want. But I don't know what it is.
I think there are 4 that you need, or really 1. I keep saying need because this is how I would certainly play it, and I think is most optimal. And generally, I think double quarterback, double kicker is just a really strong cash game strategy because of the floors that is provided. But I do think there's obviously inherent risk with PJ Walker, given the in-game benching risk, and just I think you can just soak up almost all of his production through DJ Moore, and he's cheaper. So I think you need DJ Moore. I think you need Mariota. I think you need the kickers, and then I haven't really looked at what that leaves me with salary, but I think I'm probably playing in that 5 to or 6 to 8K range, which probably gets me onto like the Chuba or Chuba and Deonta Foreman types. Maybe Kyle Pitts forces his way into a cash game build there, but I think that's kind of how I'm playing through it.
No, I agree with you on the double quarterback, double kicker thing. When a young Gary Hartman started playing Showdown slates like 6 or 7 years ago, or 7, 8 years ago, right out of college, I really thought I unlocked something when every week I'm like, you just got to play both quarterbacks and both kickers and you get some good lineup. And like one time on a Giants slate or something, I had like Odell as my other guy. And I got into like, I got into like top 8 in a GPP. I was like thrilled. I was like, I've unlocked this.
I've unlocked the secret.
This is a long time ago we're talking, but I still have a soft spot in my heart for the double kicker, double quarterback thing for sure. So, all right, flag plants. I'm going to give you the honors because I got to stop getting so cute. I've been trying to get these RB2s, these weird players, and I've been failing on my flag plants. So I think I went Dontrell Hilliard in my last show. That was not it. I don't know who you flag planted with Adam on Monday night, but I'll give you the honors either way.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that when you just flag plant the best plays, it just happens to work out. And as kind of just a macro point here on flag plants, we're generally looking for guys that we're higher on relative to market. So generally, it's not going to be the best plays because they're already popular. We want to give you guys some options. You know who the best plays are. We want to give you some options, maybe a little bit further down the board, maybe ways to differentiate your lineups, but guys that we are also high on relative to market. So no better way after that to say that I'm in on Terrace Marshall, flag plant Terrace Marshall, captain Terrace Marshall. 8,400 is really going to suppress his ownership, especially at captain. He's priced right around DJ Moore. He's more expensive than Drake London, more expensive than Kyle Pitts. The field doesn't know about Terrace Marshall yet, and he's LSU wide receiver. I think he has alpha potential. I don't know if we'll necessarily see it, but the opportunities are going to be there without Robbie Anderson, without CMC, with DJ Moore getting a lot of the defensive attention. I think he will be targeted frequently in a game that they may be trailing. So I think Terrace Marshall is a great pivot as a low-owned captain option and offers direct leverage off of a popular DJ Moore.
Very nice. I like that a lot. So there's an ongoing joke in our NBA team right now that I'm called Cash Game Gary because I came in chat one day before ownership projections were updated and Kawhi and PG and all these guys were ruled out, and I'm like, I'm flag planting Norm Powell, and Norm Powell ended up being like 70% owned, and he also completely busted. So until I can't for now, that's my moniker, and I don't know if this guy is going to be considered a major cash play at 44%. But to me, Deonta Foreman should be like a 70% play on this slate. So I want to be way over on Deonta Foreman. And I get that our projections are showing Hubbard and him to be similar, but between the tackles, running backs have had a lot of success against Atlanta this year. The weather is going to be a factor in some way. And I think that he gets in the end zone twice tonight. And I think that the field might come a little bit off him just because he came back down, crashing down to earth last week after the big week in week 8. So I really like him at 7. I want to be double the field at captain. I think I'd want to be 16 to 20% captain on Deonta Foreman. I think he's, in my opinion, he's the best overall play on the slate here tonight. So I love Foreman in this spot. And I think he's a pretty good running back also. So just eye test wise. So
I like that call because we've seen it recently too on main slates where like recency bias is creeping its way back into the DFS lexicon. We thought we had gotten away from it, but I think you're right. I think we see Deonta Foreman come in under 40% as ownership gets steamed up on some of these guys that are priced around him.
Yeah, so I like him a lot, 7,800. So that's all. That's a long way to say he would be on my cash team, but I get that he might not be an automatic cash play. But I definitely like him in tournaments. So, meanwhile, I have a friend texting me on the side. There's a Patterson Foreman each score 1 touchdown boost that's interesting tonight. So take that for what you will.
Smash.
Shout out to my friend Zach, who's an ETR subscriber. I'm going to tell him to watch the end of the show. All right, that will do it for us here. We'll be back. I don't know Sunday night what the deal is. Maybe we'll be back for a show Sunday. We'll definitely be back for a show Monday. If you want to see more of my face, we go for a free show on the ETR NBA YouTube page starting in 15 minutes for the injuries on tonight's slate for NBA. We do that every day, free if you're an NBA player. Please do go give the ETR NBA YouTube page a like, a thumbs up, a subscribe. We would really appreciate it. I'll be over there live with Mike Gallagher in 15 minutes if you're interested in checking that out, if you're an NBA fan. But I know you're here for NFL. Enjoy the game tonight. It might be PJ Walker versus Marcus Mariota, but it's still NFL football. And for that, we are grateful. Take care, everyone.